Luke chapter 1, verse 26. In the 6th month, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary. The angel went to her and said, "Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you." Mary was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. But the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will be with child and give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever. His kingdom will never end." "How will this be?" Mary asked the angel, "since I am a virgin?" The angel answered, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you. The power of God Most High will overshadow you. So the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God. Even Elizabeth, your relative, is going to have a child in her old age. And she who was said to be barren in her 6th month. For nothing is impossible to God." "I am the Lord's servant," Mary answered. "May it be to me as you have said." Then the angel left her. Now, I don't know about you, but a young girl, probably 15, 16 years old, having an angel come and say, "You are blessed among all people. You're pregnant." Now, that doesn't sound like much of a blessing right up front, because you'd have to have all these things going through your mind. What are people going to think? I'm going to go tell people God appeared to me and told me that God himself is going to be the father of this child. How many people are going to believe that? Joseph didn't even believe it. How can God bless you when it seems like his touch in your life is going to create a lot of problems? That God being involved in your life is going to cause people to have all kinds of issues with you. We'd think if God is with us, everything's going to go our way, right? See, when we're in our travel called life itself, when we're on this journey, and we want to walk close to God, there's a cost to that. I lost several of my friends when I committed my life to Christ. My life changed. My relationships changed. My outlook on life changed. But it wasn't always easy, and it's never really been easy. Along with the blessing of having God in your life means that you're going to take a stand against the things that are opposite God. So Mary had all these questions. I'm going to be pregnant. I'm going to have to tell my mom. I'm going to have to tell my dad. How do you think that went over? I've got to tell my fiance, who has never been with me sexually. So here she had this responsibility. But God did bless Mary in the sense that he sent the angel to also tell Joseph what was going on. Not initially. Joseph was trying to figure out how to put her away from him without causing a great ordeal. And then the angel came to him and said, "This child is from God." All of Mary's life, she had to put up with the fact that people, especially the religious people, considered her an adulteress. Or at best, that she had this pregnancy out of wedlock at a time when that was not acceptable at all. I want you to keep that in mind as I go on with this message. Mary had a difficult time ahead of her. But you know that with that pregnancy, she would have had to have considered, who am I going to have as a midwife? Where will the baby be born? Will it be born in the house? Will my mom and dad put up with that? Will my friends gather around to help? And so she would have set up what we would have considered today a nursery. She would have set up this opportunity for where she would give birth, who would be there with her, who would help her through the time. And she made plans. For 9 months, she made plans. And then in the latter part of her 8th month, early part of her 9th month, Luke chapter 2 happens. Luke chapter 2. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And everyone went to his own town to register. So Joseph also went up to the town, from the town of Nazareth to Galilee in Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house of the line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, I want you to underline, while they were there, the time came for the baby to be born. And she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths, placed him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. So I want you to consider this. Number one, while she was there, we think, she got to Bethlehem that night, she had the baby. Probably wasn't the case. She got there and she had a few days to try to prepare for the birth of this child. I want to speak about that in just a moment, more about what was the journey like, a 10-day journey basically, being ready to give birth. A couple things we can assume. It wasn't a fun journey. It wasn't a journey she wanted to be on. And yet the angel said, you're blessed of God. Above all women, you're blessed of God. Now you're going to go on a journey. It says that she gets to Bethlehem and there's no place for them. The word inn is usually translated as inn, but the word literally means guest room. There was no guest room for her. Now, I want you to think about that for a moment. Joseph's family was in Bethlehem. Generally, the families, the clans would gather together and stay together. We interpret that as inn. I interpret it as there was no place, there was no guest room for them. If that's the case, either they were slow in getting there and all the families filled up the homes and filled up everything, but it means there was no place for her to give birth. Generally, families would gather together and allow her a place for that birth. But it's as if every household closed their doors to them. Why? Because this was a child out of wedlock. They were sinners. They were being shunned even by their own family. And so for a couple of days, they have to walk around and try to find out where they're going to stay. It puts a little bit different light on it, doesn't it? To be rejected by your own family, to be ridiculed, to be criticized. And yet God said, you're blessed among all women. Why in the world would we put up with something like that from God? That God says, hey, you're going to be blessed if you follow me, and then we follow him, and the journey is not always easy. Mary's preparations, everything went out the door. All of the plans she had, all of the dreams that she had, Joseph and her talking about what this meant while they were being shunned by even family members. What did this mean? What does it mean that we're going to parent the Son of God? What was Mary thinking along the way? What were her prayers like? Do you think there were prayers of disappointment, discouragement? I'm sure there were those times. I'm sure she was going, God, did I hear you right? How many times in our Christian walk do we have to stop and say, did I hear you right? Is this what I'm supposed to do? The journey wasn't easy. Everything now is up in the air. All the plans she had made were gone and distorted. And now she had to find a place to give birth. I would say she was pretty discouraged. I would say that she and Joseph were really probably questioning God and His wisdom. Have you ever questioned God in the journey that He's put you on? You ever come back and said, what are you thinking? Why did this happen? I chose to follow you and it seems like my life fell apart. Story about a missionary who spent 25 years on a foreign mission, had his children while on the mission field. Every once in a while for furlough, they would come home to the United States and they'd see all the things the people had here. And then they'd go back to the mission field where they had nothing. And the children didn't complain. They followed their father. They followed the call. But when the father finally retired and he was sent back home to the United States, they were going back, they didn't have anything. They didn't have any support. He was going to have to find a job. They were going to try to make it. He had been responsible for leading hundreds and hundreds of people to the Lord on the mission field. Now he comes back. And there was another plane that had landed close to where their plane landed. And there were throngs of people gathered at that airplane, cheering and yelling and supporting this 19-year-old rock star that had done nothing in his life but write a song. And the world was celebrating. They had a car for him. They had this great greeting. And here's this father, after 25 years of mission work, comes in. There was nobody there to greet him. Nobody there to celebrate them. They didn't have a job. They didn't have anything. And the son was really discouraged. And the father finally said, son, what's wrong? And he goes, I don't get it. It doesn't make sense. You followed God all of your life. You went on the mission field. You gave up everything to go on the mission field. You come home, there's no one to greet you. You've got a lot of work ahead of you. We all do. And here's this young guy who didn't follow God, wrote a song, and the world is there to greet him. It's not fair. We come home and we have nothing. And the dad looked at him and said, son, we're not home. There's a time when we're going to be home. And the celebration there will outshine anything this young man would ever see. You know, our journey's hard. You know, we would cry out with Mary, why is this happening? I thought I was blessed of God. I thought I was supposed to have everything open up for me because God is with me. But it seems like everything fell apart. I will tell you, Mary did not want to go on that trip. Nothing in Scripture says that, but I'll guarantee you she didn't want to go on that trip. I'll guarantee it wasn't an easy trip for her or Joseph. I bet on the night that Jesus was born and he was going to be laid in a manger, in a cave, basically, I'll bet it wasn't a very silent night. I bet Mary wasn't very silent about it, but I'll bet when she started her nesting moment where she had to get everything cleaned up, the cows, the donkeys, or anything else in that thing got moved outside, and they weren't happy. And she started preparing a place for her child. And then when he's born, what do you think Joseph and Mary were expecting the Son of God to look like? There's nothing special about him. According to Isaiah 53, we studied it last week, there was nothing attractive about him. He was probably an ugly baby. Think about it. Why would God leave everything in heaven, be born in a manger, live the lowliest of lives, and come looking like Tom Cruise or The Rock? He didn't. He came looking like Pee Wee Herman or Danny DeVito. Here's Mary and Joseph expecting this baby to come out and say, "Hi, blessed are you." No, this baby had to learn how to talk. God learning about life in a whole different manner through the eyes of a baby. Mary and Joseph trying to figure out, what do we do now? Was this the way it was supposed to happen? See, God doesn't do things the way we expect on our journey. A lot of times things happen differently, and you don't see the reason for it until later on. See, what Mary didn't understand was there was a prophecy that the Son of God, the suffering servant, was going to be born in Bethlehem. God had to move them from Nazareth to Bethlehem to fulfill that prophecy. What Mary didn't understand in her journey of fulfilling prophecy, that her journey was going to be talked about for over 2,000 years. People were going to celebrate this journey that she took, this birth that she gave. Sometimes our journey may seem very trivial to us, but in God's heavenomics, it's going to be something people will talk about for eternity. What about your journey? You know, there's no place in the Scripture where anybody who was called of God had an easy journey other than Solomon. Abraham was called and said, "Hey, Abraham, I want you to leave Ur of Chaldees, where you have everything going your way. I want you to follow me. I'm going to take you to a place that is going to become yours, a land flowing with milk and honey." Abram gets there, and there's a famine. We have Joseph, one of the 12 sons of Jacob. His brothers reject him, sell him into slavery. Then he's falsely accused of rape, and he's thrown in prison. And the whole time he was called of God to do something great. So much so that at the end of his life, when he met with his brothers, he said, "What you intended for evil, God turned out for good." Joseph's journey wasn't fun. Everyone you look at in the Bible that ever accomplished anything had a real tough journey, even though God was with them. One of the reasons we know why the message of the resurrection is true, 11 of the 12 apostles, Judas hanged himself. Paul replaced it, so let's say the 12 apostles. Every one of the 12 apostles, other than John, suffered martyrdom. And all they had to do was say, "Okay, it's a lie. Jesus didn't raise from the dead." Think about that for a minute. All of them, if it would have been a lie, I believe it was Thomas who was flayed to death, skinned to death. One of them was used as target practice with spears and arrows. Peter was crucified, hanging upside down. Paul was beheaded. All they had to do is say, "It's a lie, we made it up." And they would have been saved. But every one of them died a martyr's death. And we know that John was tortured many times before he wrote the Revelation on the island of Patmos that he had been exiled to. 12 people who said, "We saw this, we experienced this." And all they had to say was, "It was a lie, we made it up." But they didn't. Their journeys were tough. But they stayed true to God through that. How's your journey going? Is it tough? You want to give up? Do you not see that you're part of God's redemptive plan? See, God has this plan for your life. And it's part of a redemptive plan that others might come to know Him. And He set you on a journey so that others might see light in you in the midst of darkness. And something about you that people would say, if that person can make it through it, I can too. That will make them hungry for what you have. That hope against all other hope. Let's look at Solomon. I said he's the only one who never really had anything bad in his life. Solomon, the guy we all would love to be. Matthew Perry, who passed away here a couple months ago, he thought that if he would be rich and famous, that it would take care of all of his depression. In his own words, it made it worse. Having everything going his way, he hated himself even more. And how many times we've seen that? You gain the world and you end up hating your life. How many of these people who have gained the world and they're addicted to drugs in order to learn how to cope? Solomon was that way. Solomon, you want to read a great book, read Ecclesiastes. Talk about a guy who had nothing to complain about. He had more riches than anybody. He had everything anybody could ever want. And all the way through Ecclesiastes, he's complaining. I tried this, it was boring. I did this, it's not any fun. Sucks to be me, kind of a thing all the way through. So the guy who had everything is the one who ended up not enjoying his life, and he ended up turning away from God. But the people who struggled with life on their journey, who overcame life itself, the hurts, the struggles, they're the ones that understood what life was really all about. And they embraced it. And so in the journey that you're on, you might be suffering things that you don't think very fair. God understands that. You might be suffering ridicule and rejection. Jesus understands that. Most of his life, he was laughed at and rejected as well. He was the illegitimate child throughout his whole life. That's why the Jewish religious people had such a hard time accepting him. So if you take Isaiah 53 into account, that he wasn't good looking, that he wasn't well built, there was nothing about him that was attractive other than the fact that God was in him. That drew people to him. He had been shunned. He had been rejected. He knows what it's like to hurt. He knew what it was like to take on the responsibility of supporting his family at an early age. His journey, God became flesh and dwelt among us, and his journey was difficult and ended on a cross. As far as life was concerned, the story ends with him raising from the dead. That message that the apostles thought was worth being tortured for, being murdered for, because they had experienced it. See, all of these stories are part of God's redemptive plan. What's your story like? It's part of God's redemptive plan for you and for the people that know you. God did not come to give you an easy life. He came to give you the best life you could ever hope for. And the best life you could ever hope for isn't having everything go your way. The best life you can ever hope for is to face difficulty head on and to make it through it and to be able to say, I didn't have the strength to do that. But God is my Redeemer, and He gave me strength to face that. He gave me strength to face that criticism, that ridicule. He gave me strength to face that sickness. He gave me strength to face life head on and to succeed. There is no book that has been written that I'm aware of about a person who has become a hero or somebody that everyone looks up to. Not one book that I know of that was written about somebody who had it easy all of their life. but it was about people who overcame insurmountable odds. Life is tough. And Jesus didn't die to give you an easy life. He died to give you the best life you could ever hope for. One with purpose and meaning. Society today is hurting so much over lack of purpose. Young people are struggling so much with, is this really what life's all about? What does it mean? What does it mean for me? What part do I play in this? And very few people are finding the answers. I'm going to tell you right up front, life is incredible. It is a journey, and it is something to be faced head on. And there are times when we laugh, and there are times when we cry. But God is with us every step of the way when we cling to Him. And we get to see His hand at work in our lives. And we begin to see that our life becomes a miracle and part of God's redemptive plan. See, we get to trust that God's going to walk through us on that journey. He's going to walk with us. He's going to help us through that journey. He's going to live through us on that journey. See, either way, life's going to happen. Life is going to happen if you're walking with God or when you're walking against Him. I'm telling you, I've chosen to walk with Him, and I had lived my life walking against Him, and I know the difference. It's far better to have God walk with you on the journey and to hold your hand. You can say, well, this life isn't giving me much. When I arrived home, I was still struggling and hurting. We're not home yet. But God walks with us while we're traveling. And we become part of His redemptive plan. And it begins with the day that you surrender your heart and your life and you just say, I can't do this on my own any longer. Would you come and be a part of my life? You see, the only thing you can ever do to stand before a holy God, in the end, when you die and you stand before a holy God, there's only one way you can do that. Listen close to this. I don't want you to ever forget this part. The only thing you can ever do to stand before a holy God is to be forgiven. That's what Jesus brings into your life. For He took your sin, all the failures, all the struggles, all the things you've ever done, and He nailed them to a tree. And He took the penalty of your shortcomings against God upon Himself so that He could forgive you. And it's the only way you can ever stand before a holy God is to be forgiven. It's not through religion. It's not through philosophy. It's by being forgiven. See, that was the redemptive plan of Christ, to provide a way that we could be forgiven. And God's redemptive plan for us is that we would know Him and that we would show others how they can be forgiven as well. And that's the story that will last for eternity. To be a part of that. To live your life, not so much that this world will be different, but to live your life that eternity will be different because of the people you brought along with you. The journey is incredible. The journey is not easy. The journey is tough. But God will be with you if you ask Him to be a part of it. If you don't ask Him to be a part of it, the journey's still bad. It's worse. The choice is yours. God never promised us an easy life, but He did promise to be with us.